Hey, welcome back to the Disney Plus Everyday Challenge. And today we have Kermit and Animal. Hi. I'm not going to do the voice. My throat's been killing me, and to do Animal right now, or even Kermit, it just seems like a really bad idea. So today we have, which premiered at midnight just a few hours ago, we have Jim Henson, Idea Man, and I forgot how sweaty these things are inside here. So, yeah. No, I'm not going to make him talk. He can blink, though. He can look dissatisfied. But yeah, this is no small thing to say that Jim Henson, those things are probably 40 plus years old. Those came out in the 80s, I'm pretty sure. It's no small thing to say that Jim Henson had a humongous impact in my life. There is, can you see this right here? Right here amongst my movie soundtracks. On LP, I played the crap out of this. Probably worried my parents. I sang the songs on this at the top of my lungs on a regular basis. That and the Queen album right up here. So yeah, and Buckner and Garcia and Pac-Man Fever. So yeah, when I think about people, the creative people who inspired me as a kid. Obviously, you're going to start with Fred Rogers. You have to understand my time growing up. Fred Rogers, Jim Henson, and Frank Oz, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, Gene Roddenberry, George Lucas, Steven Spielberg. You could throw in Monty Python, and of course, Weird Al Yankovic and Nolan Bushnell. So, even though my Intellivision friends might not like that. Atari bought Intellivision. What are you gonna do? It's been a long time. So yeah, for me to did you get to see my T-shirt? It came from the Onion. I've only worn it once or twice before on these things. Well, we've had a Muppet thing. So this documentary sums up pretty much everything I already knew and a lot of things I did not about the man. It's directed by Ron Howard, produced by Brian Grazer and Ron Howard. And it features interviews with the people he worked with, obviously Frank Oz, and so many others. Rita Moreno, who was a guest one point, also speaks in there. Jennifer Connelly from Labyrinth talks about her time making probably the biggest bomb of his career and one of his final big projects. But she doesn't talk about the bombing part. She just talks about her experience making the film. There's a lot of archived footage, a lot of older stuff you may have seen before in other documentaries and things for maybe Labyrinth or Dark Crystal or The Muppet Show or Sesame Street. All sorts of historic footage is thrown into this, and stuff going all the way back just the early stuff. Of course, for me, it's the Muppets. I started with Sesame Street. The Muppet Show was an obvious thing to follow up with, and yeah, to the end of this, I had about 15 minutes or so to go. Those who know that Jim passed many years ago, way too young, a man with way too many ideas and ambitions, and he was more than just a puppeteer. He was more than just a guy who stuck his hand up inside a frog. And so many other puppets. He's a creative genius, and I don't apply that lightly. Of course, I would apply it to the people who I listed just prior, but this brought out a lot of emotions in me, especially when I knew what was coming. And about 15 minutes in, I just stopped, and I knew it was coming. And I just sort of got up, got a drink of water, went to the bathroom, sat back down, and I took in the last few moments. And talking about Jim's work ethic and his ability to just sort of, I'm just going to not deal with my health. And to find that he, one of the last things he said to Frank Oz is like, hey, I've got an idea for something. And it was the last thing that Frank Oz ever heard from Jim. And it's heartbreaking. But more heartbreaking is but it's also joyous. Is every time I hear about this, his funeral, it's more of a wake. There was a Zydeco band, and I think lots of jubilant music. There was people had butterflies on sticks and Muppets singing on stage. Their performers performing with their characters that they're best known for. And then Big Bird coming out and singing "It Isn't Easy Being Green." Yeah, that's the showstopper. That's just... I have a cold, so yeah, it's not just me being emotional. It's just me full of snot. So that's delicious sounding, isn't it? This documentary goes all the way back to his early days, black and white, dealing with just local television. He even being interviewed by Orson Welles at this point. There's footage of him and Frank being interviewed by Orson Welles and about the magic behind it, and him being really just, I don't know. He's being very complimentary, but it just sounds weird coming from Orson Welles. But they're talking about their early days, and we discover that Jim, growing up, never even saw like a puppet show or things like that. Didn't see a whole lot of puppet shows. He wasn't like inspired to be a puppeteer necessarily. He wanted to be on TV. And when he had the opportunity to be on TV and they were asking for puppeteers for some sort of, show, he's like, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that. And his real passion, as we discover in this, has been with filmmaking, with making art, making independent, experimental films. And you get to see a lot of it in here. Some of the animation he's done, some of the crafting, and you just see an endless fountain of creativity in this man. And I'm sure he wasn't perfect in any way. He had a struggle with his marriage. His kids barely got to see him at times. And it was, they don't necessarily gloss over that. It's not the focus, but his family definitely has some things to say. But there's never question as to his genius, as to his creativity, his imagination, his just endless ability to push boundaries, try new things, and be unafraid, and be endlessly kind to the people he worked with. It's where you get sometimes a feeling that Frank, who was very much burnt to his Ernie, despite what he might think in some cases, excuse me, where you might feel a little bit of contention. There's also a reverence for his friend. This I can't even imagine. With failures on his docket, and honestly, even early on, wanting to get the Muppet Show made well before the existence of Sesame Street. By the way, we're halfway through the documentary. This is an hour and 48 minutes long. We're an hour into this, and we haven't even reached the Muppet Show yet. There's a lot going on in the early days, in the 60s especially. His need to speak to the world, his need to do more than just puppet shows. By the way, the early puppet stuff was really violent, and he kind of also wanted the freedom. He was always, you can see a lot of footage of these puppets doing ads for bacon and bread and other stuff like that, and they're like blowing stuff up and shooting each other and doing all sorts of crazy stuff. But he had a certain amount of freedom in his creativity, just to blow 60 seconds advertising a loaf of bread that would hopefully make people buy the bread. Hey, mommy, the puppets blew each other up. Let's get that special bread. Yeah, I don't know. I guess that's what you did back then on the television. Television was very new when he started out doing these things. So you get to see the evolution of so much of what he did, even going into a very strange place through the early first 2 years, I think, of Saturday Night Live. Yeah, if you don't know that, the Muppets used to be on Saturday Night Live, and they weren't allowed to write their own stuff, and it was not a good fit, but yeah. There's lots of neat little stories and secrets and moments that this generation, the current, I don't want to sound like an old man, this generation doesn't appreciate the Muppets. I know I have like nieces who I've tried to show the Muppets with as they were growing up, and they just never really got it. They never really understood it. I don't know if the kids that my friends have, they're very small, if they'd ever get the Muppets, if they'd ever really appreciate Kermit and Piggy and Fozzie. I almost said Fonzie. So I don't know if I'd ever, they can never fully get that. I don't know if they can fully make the kind of comeback of what the Muppets are, because we've had there's plenty of Muppet shows on Disney Plus that have come and gone in a season pretty quickly. It's not that they were bad, some of them weren't great, but some of them weren't horrible, and they just don't stick. We've had new movies, but nothing hits quite like the original. Yes, on VHS. Not the original cover either, but I have it on VHS. I unashamedly also have The Dark Crystal and Labyrinth on VHS. So, yeah. I have a lot of VHS, so maybe that's not saying anything then. But if you're a fan, if you ever were a fan, if you're like, oh, that stuff isn't good anymore, ever since Jim died, it's not just any good stuff. Well, you know what? Here's your chance to go back to the old days. You can make Muppets great again. You can relive those moments and discover a man who had dreams and ideas, and while not a perfect guy, by any means, who is a perfect guy? Or gal? Or anyone. But you can never question his creativity. You can never question his passion for pushing the boundaries in everything he did when it comes to not just the Muppets and filmmaking and just so much. It sucks that something so simple had to take him away from us. And I try to imagine what he'd be doing today. Eventually he did, just like George Lucas eventually did many years later, he sold the Muppets to Disney. That's why you see all the Disney stuff, all the Muppet stuff on Disney Channel, on Disney Plus. And it's the same reasoning that George Lucas gave. Strangely, there's no interview with George Lucas, there's no mention of George Lucas, and George Lucas has worked with the Jim Henson Company over the years. It's just very strange that there was no George Lucas in this. That's just my observation. So, but the idea is that they had characters that were precious to them, that at a time when everything was falling apart, Jim had the power and influence and connections to buy back his own creations. He bought back all the films, the TV shows, and everything else, and eventually sold it to Disney when it came time. But it was his deal to make. It wasn't somebody else just selling off the rights. I didn't really fully consciously understand this. I didn't understand that technically the Muppet Show is a British-made show. Nobody in America was spending money on it. They weren't willing to. But somebody in England, Lord Lou, I forget his last name, but Lord Lou, he's the one who ponied up the money. And we had the Muppet Show, 5 seasons of the Muppet Show because of it. Going out at its height, they didn't have enough episodes to make to fit everyone who wanted to be on that show. That says something. It was the most watched television show in the world at one point. There's not too many shows that can say that. Friends, maybe Seinfeld for a time, but those are like in the 90s, early 2000s. It's for a man who failed so much, he succeeded at so much more. And failing was never a thing that was ever determined by him. It was just determined by the whims of fate, just things out of his control. Usually, people not understanding his vision, which was, it seemed like a century ahead of everybody else's. So if he was alive today, we would see some amazing stuff. There's a reality out there in the multiverse where he's still alive. I'd love to visit that world and to see the things he's created. Yeah. That's all I can really say about this. Again, highly, highly recommend this to any Muppets fan, Sesame Street fan. It's when you, I didn't realize also when just watching Sesame Street, all those little animated segments, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, that was animated and created by him. It's not just like, hey, we brought some animators in and just did a little sequence with music. No, that was him. They said, hey, you know what? We're doing this kids show. And he really didn't want to be the guy just doing a kids show for preschoolers. But there was something pure and wonderful about doing that. And he fell in love with it. He didn't want to just do that. He just didn't want to be just defined by that. He wanted to go on and make the Muppet Show and everything else that came after it. And just push the boundaries of puppetry and animatronics and so much else. But he stuck with it. And yeah, I appreciate the Muppets on a much deeper level than you. And maybe not. If you love the Muppets too, hey, tell me what you think. Tell me when you see this, and tell me what you love about Jim Henson. I'd love to hear it. I'd love to hear what people have to say about Jim Henson. Hopefully good things. How they might have formed your childhood. Again, there's not too many people in the world where you can just say, his family life is none of my business. They shared it with us in this documentary because it was true. It had to do with their family. And it's none of my business to judge him based on the decisions he and his wife made. But, yeah, I could go on forever, I realize that. But I can talk about all the things forever that he put positively in my life. And if you wonder how good this film, thank you, Ron Howard, starts wonderfully and it finishes perfectly. And so I can't say it too many more times, but I highly recommend it. I picked this number yesterday, 285, because I wasn't sure if I was going to have a voice, and I wanted to make sure that if I had to, I could already film it. 285 is another documentary. Sorry, it's a long stretch of documentaries, I realize, over this past week. But this is very different than this one. It is the real Black Panther. No, it has nothing to do with T'Challa of Wakanda or Chadwick Boseman. It has to do with a real Black Panther, which doesn't really exist. It's a cheetah that's just black. But I'll tell you more about that tomorrow on the Disney Plus Everyday Challenge, the real Black Panther. I'll see you then. Bye. Okay.